that Vladimir Putin is coming to the White House in the fall.
Say that again?
Vladimir Putin coming
Did I hear you? Did I hear you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's going to be special.
That was Director of National Intelligence Dan Coats being informed by NBC's Andrea Mitchell last summer of President Trump's plan to invite Russian President Vladimir Putin to the White House. That meeting never happened, but the same disconnect between the White House and the intelligence community was a running theme at an open Senate hearing Tuesday. The directors of the FBI, CIA, and National Intelligence testified before the Senate Intelligence Committee on how their agencies are combating global threats. During the hearing, Intel Chief Dan Coats broke with the president on a number of issues, including North Korea, ISIS, and Iran. Take a look.
He understands denuclearization, and he's agreed to it. And you see that. He's agreed to it.
We currently assess that North Korea will seek to retain its WMD capabilities and is unlikely to completely give up its nuclear weapons and production capabilities.
We have won against ISIS. We've beaten them, and we've beaten them badly.
ISIS is intent on resurging and still commands thousands of fighters in Iraq and Syria.
The Iran deal is defective at its core. If we do nothing, we know exactly what will happen. In just a short period of time, the world's leading state sponsor of terror will be on the cusp of acquiring the world's most dangerous weapons.
We do not believe Iran is currently undertaking activities we judge necessary to produce a nuclear device.
CBS News intelligence reporter and producer Olivia Gazis joins us now. She is in Washington. Olivia, thanks so much for joining us. We've heard quite a few contrasts between the White House and the intelligence community on several issues. Based on what Director Coats said about North Korea, how different is this from the president's assessment?
Well, the assessment we heard today is certainly hard to square with what the president declared just last June, which is that there's no longer a nuclear threat from North Korea. What we heard not only from Director Coats, but from several other intelligence leaders today was that the nuclear threat, while not necessarily increased, it's not abated. It certainly hasn't disappeared. It stayed the same, even as rhetoric between the U.S. and North Korea has changed, because obviously we've come a long way from Little Rocket Man. But what, in essence, Coats said is that even though we haven't seen nuclear missile tests in the past year, the intelligence community sees continuing activity that's inconsistent with denuclearization. And Coats also said that North Korea still sees its nuclear weapons as critical to its survival, and that it's unlikely to ever give up all of its stockpiles. And so if progress on that front is a policy priority for the United States, it's kind of hard to see what justifies a second summit between the president and Kim Jong-un next month, even though all indications are that it's still fast approaching.
All right, we'll wait to see what details come of that. Let me ask you about ISIS. Well, President Trump says ISIS is defeated. Director Coats said that's not the case. So how does the intelligence community view the threat of ISIS?
I think they view it, what we saw today, as an enduring one, and one that's going to be fought on a number of battlefields, including in Syria. In fairness to the president, and as mentioned by some of the intelligence leaders there today, the territory that was once held by ISIS is vastly diminished. That just doesn't mean that the threat itself is. We heard today that ISIS not only commands thousands of fighters in Iraq and Syria, but that some of those fighters are finding footholds in other ungoverned spaces, and that its ideology certainly still persists. It can be spread to all corners of the world online. What I think was most worrisome about what Coats stressed today is that ISIS is likely to exploit any reduction in pressure that means from the United States and will strengthen its presence where it exists in Iraq and Syria. And that really throws into question the wisdom of withdrawing the U.S. troop presence there with anything but a very well thought out timetable.
Well, Director Coats also addressed election meddling. Here's some of what he said.
Foreign actors will view the 2020 U.S. elections as an opportunity to advance their interests. We expect them to refine their capabilities and add new tactics as they learn from each other's experiences and efforts in previous elections. On the heels of our successful efforts to protect the integrity of the 2018 midterm elections, we are now focused on incorporating lessons learned in preparation for the 2020 elections.
So, Olivia, what concerns do intelligence officials have for the 2020 campaign?
Well, one thing, as you heard there, that intelligence officials almost always fear is a lack of imagination. So how do we anticipate what's coming up next? And that certainly applies to elections in general. We've only slowly come to an understanding of what Russia did in 2016, just years after the fact. Those efforts may have changed slightly and been more subdued in 2018, but there are still some question marks as to what was really attempted and by whom. What Coates and others highlighted today is that bad actors like Russia, and not necessarily only Russia, are going to refine their capabilities. They're going to come up with new ones and to learn from each other's experiences. And that means that there could be a whole new approach to disrupting our election processes in the future. And according to the written assessment that came out today, plenty of adversaries are probably already looking at 2020 to see what exploitable opportunities do exist.
Well, Olivia, Director Coates also said that a private meeting between President Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin in Helsinki last year was, quote, clearly a sensitive issue, but he chose not to address it further in the public hearing. Why is Director Coates treading lightly here?
I think for two reasons. One reason, the relationship between President Trump and Vladimir Putin is a source of widespread ongoing speculation, and especially given the numerous intelligence and security threats that Russia continues to pose to the United States, it's genuinely perplexing as to why we hear reports about these unique one-on-one conversations between President Trump and Putin, about why Mr. Trump's statements about Putin are so consistently positive. That behavior is simply hard to square with what's been otherwise a tough sanctions regime that this administration has put in place on Russian officials and on businesses to date. But as we saw in the intro, Coates has also been burned before because, this past summer, we were surprised on stage with Andrea Mitchell with the news that the White House had invited Putin to visit Washington, D.C. He kind of did that double take and quipped, that's going to be special. So my guess is Coates wanted to make sure he didn't have a similar overly candid moment in front of lots of senators and cameras today.
All right, Olivia Gazis in Washington for us. Olivia, thank you so much.
Thanks, Elaine.